The dust hung in the air like a warning when Josephine Adams clutched her swollen belly and stepped onto the auction block in Wilcox, Arizona Territory, 1879. Sweat trickled down her spine as she faced the sea of leering faces, men with tobacco-stained teeth and hungry eyes appraising her like she was nothing more than livestock. 6 months pregnant and sold to the highest bidder, this was what had become of her life after her husband's death had left her penniless and indebted. Next up, a fine woman, still young enough to work and breed, comes with a child on the way too for the price of one. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the town square, causing Josephine to flinch. Her chestnut hair was matted against her forehead, and her once fine dress hung limp on her frame. She had never imagined ending up here when she'd married Thomas 2 years ago, but his gambling debts and sudden death from fever had sealed her fate. Starting bid at $50. Who'll give me $50 for this fine specimen? Josephine kept her eyes fixed on the distant mountains, refusing to acknowledge the men who shouted crude remarks about her condition. Her hands trembled as they rested protectively over her unborn child, just 24 years old, and her life had come to this moment of utter degradation. $50, a voice called out from the crowd, belonging to Randall Simmons, the owner of the local saloon who was known for how he treated the women who worked for him. 60. Another voice joined in, a rancher whose reputation for cruelty extended to both his animals and his workers. The bidding continued, each increase making Josephine's heart sink further. These men didn't want her for honest work, they wanted to own her, to use her however they pleased. $150. A voice rang out from the back of the crowd, causing heads to turn. The crowd parted slightly, revealing a tall figure on horseback. Xander Zimmerman sat atop his chestnut stallion, his face partially shadowed by the wide brim of his hat. His appearance caused a ripple of whispers. Everyone in the territory knew of him, the successful rancher whose land stretched for miles outside of Wilcox. What was he doing bidding on a pregnant widow? 200, challenged Simmons, eyeing Xander with suspicion. 300, Xander countered immediately, his voice even and controlled. The crowd grew silent. $300 was an extravagant sum for a woman in Josephine's condition. 300 going once. The auctioneer called, looking around eagerly, going twice. 350, Simmons spat, his face reddening with anger. $500, Xander stated firmly, silencing the crowd completely. The auctioneer's eyes widened. $500 from Mr. Zimmerman. Do I hear more? Silence fell over the square. No one could or would outbid that amount. Sold. To Mr. Xander Zimmerman for $500. Josephine felt her knees weaken as the reality of her situation sank in. Sold to a man she knew only by reputation, a man who had just spent a small fortune to own her. What kind of man would pay such a price? As the auctioneer urged her forward, Xander dismounted and approached the platform. He was taller than she'd realized, broad-shouldered and imposing. He wore no gun belt like most men in these parts, but something about his presence suggested he didn't need one to command respect. He paid the auctioneer, then turned to her, extending his hand to help her down from the platform. When she hesitated, fear evident in her eyes, he leaned closer. "You're safe now," he whispered, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Josephine stared at him, searching his face for any sign of deceit. His eyes were a startling blue against his sun-darkened skin, and there was something in them she hadn't expected: kindness. "Why?" She managed to ask, her voice barely audible. "Not here," he replied, still holding out his hand. "Please." With no other choice, she placed her hand in his and allowed him to guide her down from the platform. His grip was firm but gentle, steadying her when she stumbled slightly. The crowd watched with curious eyes as Xander led her to his horse. Some of the men called out crude suggestions, but Xander ignored them, keeping his attention focused on helping Josephine mount the horse before climbing up behind her. "Hold on," he instructed, reaching around her to take the reins, creating a protective circle with his arms. As they rode away from town, Josephine sat rigid in the saddle, acutely aware of the stranger at her back. The child within her kicked, as if sensing her distress. "I'm not going to hurt you, Mrs. Adams," Xander said after they had ridden in silence for several minutes. Or your child. How do you know my name? She asked, her voice stronger now that they were away from the crowd. This is a small territory, news travels. He paused. I heard about your husband's passing. I'm sorry for your loss. Josephine said nothing. Her marriage to Thomas had not been a love match, more a desperate attempt to escape the poverty of her childhood. He had been kind enough, but his gambling had destroyed whatever security the marriage might have offered. Where are you taking me? She finally asked. To my ranch. It's about an hour's ride from here. He adjusted his hold on the reins. You'll have your own quarters there. A proper bed, clean clothes, regular meals. And what will you expect in return, Mr. Zimmerman? She forced herself to ask the question that had been burning in her mind since he'd placed his bid. He was quiet for a long moment. I expect nothing from you that you're not willing to give freely, Mrs. Adams. I need help running my household, it's true. But you're with child, and I'm not the kind of man who takes advantage of that situation. Josephine wanted to believe him, but experience had taught her that men rarely did anything without expecting something in return. Still, there was something in his manner that made her want to trust him. Why did you buy me? She asked bluntly. He sighed. Because no one should be sold like cattle, Mrs. Adams, especially not a woman in your condition. The men bidding on you, he stopped, his jaw tightening visibly. They wouldn't have treated you well. I couldn't stand by and watch that happen. They rode in silence as Josephine processed his words. The pregnancy had left her exhausted, and despite her wariness, she found herself leaning back against his solid chest as the rhythm of the horse's gait lulled her. Rest if you need to, Xander said softly. I won't let you fall. Against her better judgment, Josephine closed her eyes. She didn't trust this stranger, this Xander Zimmerman, not completely. But for the first time since Thomas had died, she felt a flicker of hope that perhaps her child might have a chance at a decent life after all. The landscape rolled by, the Arizona desert giving way to grasslands as they traveled north. Xander's ranch, the Z-Bar, sprawled across 5,000 acres of prime grazing land nestled against the foothills. As they crested a rise, Josephine awoke from her half-slumber to see a large, well-built house surrounded by several outbuildings and corrals filled with horses and cattle. That's your home, she asked, unable to hide her surprise. She had expected something more modest. It is, he confirmed. My father built it 20 years ago when he first settled here. He had grand dreams. And did they come true? Josephine asked. A shadow passed over Xander's face. Some did. Others died with him and my mother during a fever outbreak 5 years ago. I'm sorry, she said softly, recognizing the familiar pain of loss in his voice. As they approached the house, a woman emerged onto the porch, gray-haired and slender, with a kind face that broke into a warm smile when she spotted them. That's Martha, Xander explained. She's been with my family since I was a boy. She runs the household and she'll help get you settled. He dismounted first, then carefully helped Josephine down. Her legs were stiff from the ride and she swayed slightly before finding her balance. Martha, Xander called, this is Mrs. Josephine Adams. She'll be staying with us. Martha hurried down the steps, her shrewd eyes taking in Josephine's condition and disheveled appearance. Rather than showing disapproval, her expression softened with compassion. Welcome, Mrs. Adams. You poor dear, you look exhausted. Martha turned to Xander. I've prepared the room at the east end of the hall, as you asked. It gets the morning sun but stays cool in the afternoon. Thank you, Martha, Xander nodded. Mrs. Adams needs rest and a good meal. She's had a difficult journey. Martha gently took Josephine's arm. Come with me, dear. A hot bath and clean clothes will do wonders. Then we'll get some food in you. You're eating for two, after all. Josephine glanced back at Xander, still uncertain. He tipped his hat slightly. Get some rest, Mrs. Adams. We can talk more tomorrow once you're feeling stronger. As Martha led her into the house, Josephine was struck by how different it was from what she had expected. The interior was well furnished but comfortable, with polished wooden floors and large windows that filled the space with light. It wasn't ostentatious, but it spoke of prosperity and permanence. Mr. Zimmerman said you'd be helping with the household, Martha chatted as they climbed the stairs. Though in your condition, I don't expect you to do much until after the little one arrives. How far along are you, dear? About 6 months, Josephine replied, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. Martha nodded. Well, we'll make sure you and the baby are well cared for. Mr. Xander is a good man, though he doesn't talk much. Lost too much too young, I suppose. The room Martha had prepared was larger than any Josephine had occupied before. A 4-poster bed with fresh linens stood against one wall, and a rocking chair was positioned near the window, which overlooked the distant mountains. The bathroom is through there, Martha indicated a door. I'll have hot water brought up. There are some clothes in the wardrobe that might fit you. They belong to Mr. Xander's mother, but I've kept them in good condition. Josephine struggled to comprehend the sudden change in her circumstances. Just hours ago, she had been standing on an auction block, facing a future of servitude or worse. Now she was being treated like an honored guest. Why is he doing this? She asked Martha. Why did he buy me? Martha's expression softened. Mr. Xander has his reasons, dear. He doesn't like injustice, never has, even as a boy. She patted Josephine's hand. Don't worry yourself about it now. Get clean, rest, eat. Tomorrow is soon enough for questions. After Martha left, Josephine sank onto the edge of the bed, overwhelmed. The child within her kicked again, more forcefully this time, as if reminding her that whatever happened, she wasn't alone. We're safe for now, she whispered, rubbing her belly gently. That's all that matters. But as she soaked in the hot bath Martha had prepared, Josephine couldn't help wondering what price she would eventually have to pay for this unexpected rescue. No matter what Xander Zimmerman had said, no man spent $500 without expecting something in return. She could only hope that when the time came to repay her debt, the cost wouldn't be more than she was willing to give. Over the next few days, Josephine settled into a routine at the Z Bar. True to his word, Xander made no demands of her, instead giving her space to rest and regain her strength. She took her meals with Martha in the kitchen, learning about the ranch and its operations. Xander himself was often absent during the day, riding out early to oversee the cattle and returning late in the evening. When their paths did cross, he was unfailingly polite but distant, asking after her health but retreating before the conversation could deepen. A week after her arrival, Josephine was sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple when Xander returned from his day's work. He hesitated when he saw her, then approached, removing his hat as he did so. Mrs. Adams, he greeted her. I hope you're feeling better. I am, thank you. She studied him in the fading light. Without his hat, she could see that his dark hair was streaked with premature silver at the temples, though he couldn't be much older than 30. Martha tells me you've been expanding the herd. He nodded, leaning against the porch railing. The railroad's pushing through to Tucson next year. There will be demand for beef. You plan ahead, she observed. Someone has to. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Josephine gathered her courage. Mr. Zimmerman, I appreciate everything you've done for me, but I can't continue to impose without understanding what you expect in return. Xander sighed, running a hand through his hair. I told you, I don't expect anything. $500 is a lot of money to spend without expectation, she pressed. He was quiet for a long moment. Do you know why I came to town that day, Mrs. Adams? She shook her head. I needed to order supplies and pay some bills. I wasn't planning to attend the auction. His jaw tightened, but when I heard they were selling a pregnant woman, it reminded me of something that happened when I was younger. He turned to look at the sunset, his profile sharp against the glowing sky. My father employed a young woman on this ranch. She was with child and unmarried. When her time came, there were complications. My father refused to send for the doctor from town, said it wasn't worth the expense. Josephine felt a chill despite the warm evening. She died. The baby too, Xander's voice was flat. I was 15. Old enough to know it was wrong, not old enough to stop it. I swore then that I would never stand by and watch a woman or child suffer if I could prevent it. I'm sorry, Josephine said softly. He shrugged, as if dismissing the memory. The past is done. But when I saw you on that auction block, I couldn't walk away. He looked at her directly. I don't expect anything from you, Mrs. Adams. When your child is born, you're free to leave if you wish. I'll provide you with enough money to start over somewhere else. And if I stay, She asked, surprising herself with the question. Then you stay on your own terms. Martha isn't getting any younger. She could use help running the house. The position would come with fair wages. Josephine studied him, trying to reconcile this man with the harsh realities she knew of the world. You're a strange man, Mr. Zimmerman, that ghost of a smile returned. So I've been told. The following weeks brought changes to the ranch as summer deepened toward fall. Josephine gradually took on light duties, helping Martha with the cooking and mending. She discovered she had a talent for organization that complemented Martha's more haphazard approach to household management. Xander remained something of a mystery, though she observed him closely when their paths crossed. He was fair with his ranch hands, generous even, but maintained a certain distance that few seemed able to bridge. With her, he was unfailingly courteous, inquiring after her comfort but rarely engaging in personal conversation. It was Martha who filled in the gaps of his story, sharing details of his life over their shared tasks. His father had been a hard man, ambitious but cruel. His mother, gentle and refined, had been worn down by frontier life and her husband's harshness. Xander had been their only child, raised to inherit the ranch, but determined not to replicate his father's methods. The old man nearly drove this place into the ground before he died, Martha confided one afternoon as they preserved peaches from the small orchard behind the house. Treated his workers so poorly they kept leaving. Xander had to rebuild everything, the herd, the reputation, all of it. He seems to have succeeded, Josephine observed, wiping sweat from her brow. The kitchen was sweltering with the canning kettles boiling. He has, Martha agreed. But success doesn't warm your bed at night, does it? That boy needs a family of his own, not just a ranch to run. Josephine felt her cheeks flush and changed the subject. She had noticed Xander's solitary nature, but had deliberately avoided thinking about his personal life. Her own circumstances were complicated enough without adding romantic entanglements to the mix. As her pregnancy advanced, Josephine found herself increasingly confined to the house. The Arizona heat was unforgiving, and her body grew unwieldy. Xander, noticing her discomfort, surprised her one evening by appearing at her door with a package. "It's a book," he explained when she unwrapped it. "I thought you might be bored, being stuck inside so much." She ran her fingers over the leather-bound volume of poetry. "Thank you." "That's very thoughtful," he shifted awkwardly. "I remember my mother reading poetry when she was alive. She said it took her away from here, at least in her mind." "Do you want to get away from here?" Josephine asked, curious about his choice of words. He considered the question seriously. "No. This land is in my blood now, but sometimes it's good to remember there's a bigger world out there." He gestured to the book. "That might help you remember too." The simple gift marked a turning point in their relationship. Josephine began joining Xander for dinner in the formal dining room rather than eating in the kitchen with Martha. Their conversations, initially stilted, gradually became more natural as they discovered shared interests in literature and music. One evening, after Martha had retired, they lingered at the table, discussing a passage from the poetry book he had given her. "I never had much formal education," Xander admitted. "My father thought book learning was a waste of time for a rancher. But my mother taught me to read poetry before I could ride a horse." "She sounds like a remarkable woman," Josephine said, watching how his expression softened when he spoke of his mother. She was. She didn't belong out here, really. She was from Boston, educated, cultured. "My father met her on a business trip and swept her off her feet." He traced a pattern on the tablecloth with his finger. By the time she realized what life on the frontier really meant, it was too late. Josephine nodded, understanding all too well how a woman could find herself trapped by a poor choice. "My own mother died when I was young. I was raised by an aunt who saw me as more of a burden than a blessing. When Thomas proposed, I said yes more to escape her household than because I loved him." It was the first time she had spoken so honestly about her marriage, and she was surprised at how easily the truth had slipped out. "Was he unkind to you?" Xander asked, his voice carefully neutral. "No, not unkind, just careless with money, with promises." She smoothed a hand over her belly. "With our future," Xander's eyes followed the movement of her hand, "and the child, He knew before he died. He seemed happy about it, promised things would be different. She gave a rueful smile. Then he caught fever and was gone within a week. His creditors took everything, including me, it seems. Not anymore, Xander said firmly. You're not anyone's property now, Josephine. It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent an unexpected warmth through her. Thank you, she said softly. For everything you've done. He looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. I've done nothing that any decent man wouldn't do. That's where you're wrong, she replied. Decent men were bidding on me that day too, only you saw me as a person, not a possession. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of two lonely souls finding unexpected connection. The moment was broken by the baby kicking forcefully enough for Josephine to gasp in surprise. Without thinking, she reached for Xander's hand and placed it on her belly. Feel, she said. He froze, his hand warm against her through the thin fabric of her dress, then his expression transformed with wonder as the baby kicked again. Strong, he murmured. Like his father, she said automatically, then faltered, remembering Thomas's weaknesses. Or like his mother, Xander suggested gently, withdrawing his hand. That night, lying in bed, Josephine found herself thinking about Xander in a way she hadn't allowed before. There was something compelling about his quiet strength, his unexpected gentleness. But her situation was precarious, dependent on his charity, carrying another man's child, her future uncertain. Whatever she might be beginning to feel for him, she couldn't afford to indulge such emotions. The next morning, Martha found her in the kitchen, preparing breakfast despite her unwieldy condition. You should be resting, Martha scolded. That baby will be here before we know it. I needed to keep busy, Josephine admitted. My thoughts were unsettled. Martha gave her a knowing look. Thinking about Mr. Xander, were you? Josephine busied herself with the coffee pot, avoiding Martha's eyes. He's been very kind to me. Kindness is just the start of it, Martha said, taking over the coffee preparations. I've known that boy since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. Never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching. Martha, please, my situation is complicated enough. The older woman patted her hand. Life is always complicated, dear. Doesn't mean you don't deserve happiness when it comes knocking. Before Josephine could respond, a commotion outside caught their attention. Through the window, they could see a rider approaching at speed, kicking up dust as he galloped toward the house. Xander emerged from the barn to meet him. Something's wrong, Martha muttered, moving to the door. They watched as the rider delivered what appeared to be urgent news. Xander's posture stiffened, and even at a distance, they could see the concern on his face. He gave the rider some instructions before striding toward the house. Martha, he called as he entered, we need to prepare for company. There's been a flash flood 10 miles south. A family's wagon was caught in it. They're bringing the survivors here. How many? Martha asked, already moving to gather supplies. A man, his wife, and 2 children. The wife is injured. His eyes found Josephine. I'm sorry to ask, but we could use your help. Of course, she replied immediately. What do you need me to do? Help Martha prepare the guest rooms. I'm going to ride out and meet them with the wagon. It will be easier on the injured woman than horseback. Within an hour, Xander returned with the family. The husband, James Cooper, was a weathered man in his 30s who cradled his unconscious wife, Sarah, as if she might break. Their children, a boy of about 7 and a girl of 5, huddled together, wide-eyed and silent with shock. Sarah Cooper had a gash on her head and possibly broken ribs from being thrown against rocks during the flood. Josephine and Martha cleaned and bandaged her wounds, while Xander took James and the children to get them settled. We lost everything, James explained later, his voice hollow as they gathered in the kitchen. The children had finally fallen asleep after being fed and bathed. The wagon, our supplies, even the oxen. We were heading to California to start fresh. You're welcome to stay until your wife recovers, Xander offered, and I can provide you with supplies when you're ready to move on. James looked at him with weary gratitude. Why would you help strangers like this? Xander's eyes briefly met Josephine's across the table. Because someone helped me once, when I needed it most. The Cooper's presence changed the dynamic of the household. Despite her own advanced pregnancy, Josephine found herself caring for the children while Martha tended to Sarah, whose recovery was slow but steady. James helped Xander with ranch work, eager to repay their hospitality with labor. One afternoon, about a week after the Coopers' arrival, Josephine was reading to the children on the porch when Xander returned early from the range. He dismounted and approached, his expression unusually light as he greeted the children. "Miss Josephine is going to have a baby," little Emma Cooper informed him solemnly. "I know," Xander replied with equal solemnity. "It's a very important job she's doing. Is it your baby?" Emma asked with a child's directness. Josephine felt heat rise to her cheeks, but Xander answered smoothly. "No, the baby belongs to Miss Josephine and her husband who has passed away, but I'm going to help her take care of it." "Like you're helping us," Emma persisted. "Something like that," he agreed, his eyes meeting Josephine's over the child's head. Later, after the children had gone inside for their nap, Xander lingered on the porch. "I'm sorry if the child's question made you uncomfortable," he said. "Children say what adults are too polite to ask," Josephine replied. "I'm sure many people will wonder the same thing." "Let them wonder," he said with unexpected fierceness. "What matters is that you and your child are safe. Why does it matter to you?" She asked, the question that had been on her mind for weeks finally finding voice. He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. "Because you matter to me," he finally said, his voice low. "More than I expected, more than is probably wise given your situation." The admission hung between them, charged with possibilities neither of them was ready to acknowledge fully. "Xander," she began, uncertain what she wanted to say. He shook his head. "You don't need to respond to that. I shouldn't have spoken so plainly. You have enough to deal with right now." He stood. "I should get back to work." As he walked away, Josephine felt a complicated mix of emotions: fear, hope, confusion. She had come to care for him too, more deeply than she had intended. But with her child due any day and her future still uncertain, she wasn't sure what place those feelings could have in her life. The decision was taken out of her hands the next morning when she woke to a sharp pain across her abdomen and the unmistakable sensation of water soaking the sheets beneath her. The baby was coming. Martha sent one of the ranch hands for the midwife in town while she and Sarah Cooper prepared the bedroom for the birth. Xander paced the hallway outside, his face drawn with concern. "It's too early," Josephine gasped as another contraction seized her. "The baby's not due for 3 more weeks." "First babies often come early," Sarah reassured her, wiping Josephine's brow with a cool cloth. "And you're strong. You'll both be fine." The midwife, Mrs. Hollies, arrived by mid-morning, by which time Josephine's labor had intensified. She examined Josephine with practiced hands. "The baby's turned properly," she announced. "But it's going to be a while yet. First babies take their time." The hours stretched on, each contraction bringing Josephine closer to the moment when she would finally meet her child. Through the haze of pain, she was aware of Martha and Sarah's steady presence, of Mrs. Hollies' calm instructions. And beyond the door, she knew Xander waited, though convention prevented him from entering the birthing room. As afternoon faded into evening, Josephine's strength began to wane. The contractions were coming closer together, but the baby seemed no closer to arriving. "She's exhausted," she heard Martha whisper to Mrs. Hollies. "Is there something wrong?" "The baby's big and she's small," Mrs. Hollies replied, keeping her voice low. "We may need to help things along." What followed was a blur of intense pain and urgent voices. Josephine felt herself drifting in and out of consciousness, the faces around her becoming indistinct. She was vaguely aware of the door opening, of Xander's voice raised in alarm, of Mrs. Hollies sharply ordering him out. "She's bleeding too much," someone said, and fear cut through Josephine's fog. "Not like this," she thought desperately, "not when I've come so far." Then, breaking through the chaos, a cry thin and indignant, but unmistakably the sound of a newborn announcing its arrival. "A boy, Mrs. Hollies declared. A fine, healthy boy." Josephine struggled to focus, desperate to see her child. "Let me hold him," she whispered. "First we need to stop this bleeding," Mrs. Hollies said firmly. "Martha, take the baby. Sarah, I need more clean cloths." The next hours passed in a haze for Josephine. She was aware of hands working over her, of urgent voices, of the distant sound of her son crying. At some point, she felt herself slipping away, too weak to fight the darkness that pulled at her. Josephine. Xander's voice reached her through the fog, insistent and afraid. Somehow he was beside her, his hand gripping hers. Josephine, stay with us. Your son needs you. His voice broke. I need you. She wanted to respond, to tell him that she needed him too, that she had come to love him in these months of quiet companionship. But the darkness was too strong, pulling her under despite her struggle to remain. When Josephine next opened her eyes, pale morning light was filtering through the curtains. For a moment she was disoriented, her body feeling strangely hollow and aching. Then memory flooded back: the labor, the birth, the bleeding. My baby, she whispered, her voice hoarse. He's right here. She turned her head to see Xander sitting beside the bed, holding a small bundle in his arms. His face was lined with exhaustion, his clothes rumpled as if he had been sitting there all night. You've been unconscious for almost a day, he said, carefully transferring the infant to her arms. Mrs. Hollis wasn't sure. We almost lost you. Josephine looked down at her son's face, perfect and solemn as he studied her with unfocused eyes. He had Thomas's nose, she thought, but something about the shape of his eyes reminded her of her own father. He's beautiful, she murmured. Like his mother, Xander said softly. She glanced up at him, noting the shadows under his eyes, the stubble on his jaw. You stayed with me. I couldn't leave. His hand moved as if to touch her face, then withdrew. Josephine, when I thought you might die. I realized a knock at the door interrupted him. Martha entered with a tray of broth and bread. Oh, thank the Lord, she exclaimed when she saw Josephine awake. We've been so worried. As Martha fussed over her, checking her temperature and helping her sit up to eat, Xander stepped back, the moment between them broken. I should let you rest, he said. We can talk later. Before she could respond, he had slipped out the door, leaving her with Martha and her newborn son. Have you thought about a name? Martha asked as she helped Josephine adjust the baby to nurse for the first time. Josephine looked down at her son's face. William, she decided. After my father, William Adams, Martha nodded approvingly. A good, strong name. Josephine's recovery was slow. The blood loss had left her weak, and though Mrs. Hollis declared the danger past, it was clear that she would need time to regain her strength. In the meantime, Martha and Sarah helped care for little William, bringing him to Josephine for feeding but taking him away when she needed to rest. Xander visited daily, but there was a new restraint in his manner, as if the intensity of what had passed between them during her labor had created a barrier rather than bringing them closer. He inquired after her health, brought her books to read during her confinement, and sometimes held William with surprising tenderness, but he never again approached the subject he had been about to raise on the morning after the birth. 2 weeks after William's arrival, Josephine was finally strong enough to leave her room. She made her way carefully downstairs, cradling her son, to find Xander at the dining table with ledgers spread before him. He stood immediately when he saw her. Should you be up, Mrs. Hollis said gentle movement would help me recover, she replied. And I was tired of staring at the same 4 walls. He pulled out a chair for her. Sit, at least. Can I get you anything? Just your company, she said, settling William more comfortably in her arms. I feel like I've been away for months instead of weeks. He smiled, the expression warming his usually serious face. The ranch has been quiet without you. Even the hands have noticed the difference. I doubt that, she said with a small laugh. I'm sure they hardly know I exist. You'd be surprised. He closed the ledger he had been working on. They ask about you and the baby every day. Pete even carved a wooden rattle for William. The thought of the rough cowboys concerning themselves with her welfare touched Josephine deeply. I've been meaning to thank you, she said after a moment, for everything you did during the birth. His expression sobered. I didn't do anything. It was Mrs. Hollis and Martha who saved you. You were there, she insisted. I heard your voice. It gave me something to hold on to when I was slipping away. He looked down at his hands. I thought I was going to lose you before I ever really had you, he said, so quietly she almost didn't hear. Xander, she began, her heart racing. He stood abruptly. I'm sorry, this isn't the right time. You're still recovering, you have a new child. He raked a hand through his hair. I promised myself I wouldn't rush you. What if I don't want to wait? She asked, surprising herself with her boldness. He stared at her, hope and uncertainty warring in his expression. What are you saying, Josephine? She took a deep breath. I'm saying that these past months have changed me, changed how I see my life, my future. She looked down at William, peacefully sleeping in her arms. When I stood on that auction block, I thought my life was over. But it was just beginning. Xander moved around the table to kneel beside her chair. I never meant to fall in love with you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. It seemed wrong given how we met, but I did, Josephine. I love you, and if you'll have me, I want to be a father to William. I want us to be a family. Tears welled in Josephine's eyes. I love you too, she whispered. I think I have for a long time, but I was afraid to admit it, even to myself. He reached out to touch her cheek, his fingers gentle. I don't want to replace what you lost. I know William's father will always be part of him, but I promise to love him as my own. Thomas gave me William, she said softly, but you gave us both a future. I can't think of a better father for my son. Xander leaned forward to press his forehead against hers, a gesture of such tenderness that fresh tears spilled down Josephine's cheeks. Between them, William stirred, his tiny hand emerging from the blanket to grasp at air. Without hesitation, Xander offered his finger, which the baby immediately clutched with surprising strength. Hello, William, he said softly. I'm going to take care of you and your mother for as long as you'll let me. 2 months later, on a crisp autumn morning, Josephine stood before the small church in Wilcox, her hand resting in Xander's as the pastor pronounced them husband and wife. William, dressed in a christening gown Martha had sewn from one of Xander's mother's dresses, slept peacefully in Sarah Cooper's arms. The Coopers had delayed their journey to California to attend the wedding. James had found work in Wilcox, and Sarah's health had fully returned. They planned to leave the following week, with the wagon and supplies Xander had provided. You saved us, James told Xander at the small reception held at the ranch afterward. Not just from the flood, but from giving up. I won't forget it. Just promise me one thing, Xander replied, his arm around Josephine's waist. When you see someone else in need, help them if you can. As their guests enjoyed the feast Martha had prepared, Xander led Josephine away from the crowd to the quiet of the porch, happy. He asked, his eyes searching hers. More than I ever thought possible, she assured him, leaning into his embrace. A year ago, I couldn't have imagined standing here as your wife. A year ago, I was a lonely man with a ranch and no real purpose beyond keeping it running, he replied. Now I have a family to build it for. I still remember the first words you said to me, she told him. You're safe now, I didn't believe you then. And now, she smiled, stretching up to kiss him softly. Now I know it's true, not just safe loved. As winter settled over the Z-Bar, the small family established new routines. Xander doted on William, spending evenings rocking him by the fire while Josephine read aloud from their growing collection of books. The baby thrived, growing chubby and strong, his laughter becoming a familiar sound in the once quiet house. Christmas brought a light dusting of snow, unusual for the Arizona territory. Josephine stood at the window watching the flakes drift down, William balanced on her hip, when Xander entered the room carrying a small package. An early Christmas gift, he explained, handing it to her. I've been saving it. Curious, Josephine unwrapped the package to find a small velvet box. Inside was a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. Open it, Xander urged. She did, finding a tiny portrait of William on one side. The other side was empty. For our next child, Xander explained, a question in his eyes. If you want more, that is, I know William keeps us busy enough. Josephine smiled, thinking of the secret she had been saving for Christmas morning. Actually, she said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach, we might need a bigger locket. His eyes widened. Are you certain? She nodded. Mrs. Hollies confirmed it yesterday. She says the baby should arrive in early summer. Xander let out a whoop of joy that startled William into giggles. He gathered them both into his arms, his face alight with happiness. When I saw you on that auction block, he murmured against her hair, I never imagined you would change my life so completely. When you whispered you're safe now, she replied, I never imagined you meant forever, but forever it was. Over the years, the Z Bar prospered and grew, as did the family that called it home. William was joined by a sister, Eleanor, the following summer, and two more brothers in the years that followed. The ranch became known throughout the territory not just for its fine cattle, but for the warmth of its welcome to travelers in need. Each year on the anniversary of the day Xander had outbid everyone at the auction, he presented Josephine with a single gift, a reminder, he said, of the moment their lives had changed forever. Sometimes it was a book of poetry, like the first one he had given her. Sometimes a piece of jewelry, or a plant for the garden she had established behind the house. On their 10th anniversary, the gift was a deed adding her name officially to the ownership of the Z Bar. "It's always been as much yours as mine," he told her as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard. William, now 10, was teaching his younger siblings to throw a lasso, his face serious with concentration. "You built this home as much as I did. From the moment you brought me here, you treated this place like it was mine," she reminded him, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Even when I was just a woman you'd bought at auction," he pressed a kiss to her temple. "I may have paid for your freedom, Josephine, but you gave me mine. I was a prisoner of my past, until you showed me how to look forward instead of back." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, just as it had on that first evening she had spent on this porch, Josephine reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the desperation of the auction block to the contentment of this moment, it had been a path neither of them could have predicted. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "sometimes I think about the women who aren't as fortunate as I was. The ones who don't have someone bid for them, someone who sees them as people rather than property." Xander nodded, his expression turning serious. "I think about that too. That's why I've been talking to Judge Patterson about changing the laws regarding debt bondage." This was news to Josephine. "You have. The territorial legislature is considering new regulations. The judge thinks with enough pressure from influential ranchers, we might be able to abolish the practice entirely." Josephine squeezed his hand. "That would be a worthy legacy, Xander. More important than all the cattle or land in Arizona." He smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling. "Well, I had a good teacher in what really matters." He looked out at their children, now engaged in a game of tag as the light faded. "William asked me yesterday if I was his real father." Josephine tensed. They had never hidden the truth from the children, but it was a subject they approached carefully. "What did you tell him?" "I said that being a father isn't about whose blood you share, it's about who loves you, protects you, teaches you." Xander's voice was steady. "And then I told him I was the luckiest man alive to be his father, because I chose him, and eventually he chose me back." Tears pricked at Josephine's eyes. What did he say to that? He thought about it for a minute, very seriously in that way he has. Then he said, "I think my other father would be glad you're taking care of us." Xander's voice roughened with emotion. "And I promised him I always would." As darkness fell, and the stars emerged in the vast Arizona sky, Josephine reflected on how a moment of utter despair had led to a lifetime of unexpected joy. The auction block that had seemed like an ending had instead been a beginning, the first step on a journey that had brought her home. "I love you, Xander Zimmerman," she said softly. "And I love you, Josephine Zimmerman," he replied, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "From the moment I saw you standing tall despite everything, I knew you were someone worth fighting for." In the distance, a coyote called to its mate, the sound echoing across the land that had become their sanctuary. Inside the house, lamps glowed warm against the gathering night, and the future stretched before them, as wide and promising as the western sky.